liberated to travel, to schmooze stateside, and to take in the view of the White House. A relaxed Boris Johnson in his element. But now challenges piling up as the Prime Minister returns home to find that the autumn is becoming more troublesome by the day. A warning today from the Bank of England that inflation could rise above 4% this winter as domestic fuel bills spike. And BP has limited petrol supplies to as many as 100 of its stations as it deals with a shortage of road hauliers.
So it's not just
shortages that are being felt on forecourts and not just by those run by BP.
All my unleaded pumps are now turned to zero. This is scary times for us. So, you know, this is now an ongoing issue where we've had no unleaded to sell, or, you know, we could have a day where there's not been no diesel to sell. And this has been going on for the last 6 weeks. We're a family-owned operation. We employ from our local community in Tile Hill. You know, we need to be selling fuel, to be driving footfall into our store, to sell, you know, baskets of grocery. This is all down to where the world that we're in today. Is it driver shortages, the new driver contracts that the governments have put into place? But look, it's the man at the end that suffers.
As many as 100 of BP's 1,200 branded petrol stations are without at least one grade of petrol. Newsnight understands that between 5 and 6 of its stations have closed altogether.
Across the HGV market,
the government says there's no need to panic buy, a view shared on its backbenches.
I have concerns that we need to ensure that our fuel is delivered so that people have fuel that they can then drive away with and that people don't panic buy. Let's remember that there are other petroleum suppliers out there for people to use.
In Whitehall, they're watching the nation's forecourts with care. This is on our radar, one minister said to me, stressing that petrol shortages are not yet a major concern. But ministers do know we're in for a long slog through winter with challenges on multiple fronts. They acknowledge that domestic heating bills will rise and there's a need for a long, hard look at the rules governing road hauliers. Hugh Merriman hopes that two factors will spur change, the petrol shortages and Brexit, now that road haulage is closed to EU workers.
I do see a short-term blip when it comes to driver shortages. I do see the answer, however, in better pay, better conditions, rather than a dash to the bottom with foreign labour. I think the government will address this by more drivers coming through, changes to the testing regime and indeed driver hours. So I hope this is just a short-term problem that ultimately ensures at the end of it we have a much better workforce that's resilient, better paid, more attractive for people to enter and go into, and we don't suffer these years of concerns about driver shortages.
Labour says this is a problem of the government's making.
We know we've got specific problems which we have long warned about within the logistics industry. It's not that this is because of COVID or any other reason. This has been happening for some time, and the reality is poor workforce planning, poor preparation for Brexit, and of course now what do we see is that we're seeing the consequences of that with this lack of investment in skills in the country, and of course that means that we're not seeing the country working joined up in the way that it should.
A Prime Minister in his pomp, far from home. A Prime Minister always on the move. But now a Prime Minister back home with political headaches galore.
Nick joins us now. Nick, what moves are on the table for Boris Johnson at this point?
Well, it's interesting. At the beginning of his US trip this week, the Prime Minister was talking about a lot of these problems were temporary. He said that the world economy is bouncing back after COVID, and he's a bit like everyone putting on the kettle at the end of a very popular television programme. You have a short-term problem. But as the week has worn on, it's becoming pretty clear that a lot of these challenges are deep-seated. You saw Hugh Merriman there in my film talking about you need major structural reform of the road haulier labour market. You can't just have the sort of the classic quick fix of cheap EU labour. That is not possible after Brexit. And I do have to say I am detecting the beginnings of nerves amongst government ministers. So ministers are saying that domestic fuel bills will go up And it won't just be a blip. They'll go up and they'll stay up because the price cap, of course, will have to go up. They know that that will then feed into inflation. You had that Bank of England warning today. And embedded inflation can change everything in politics, because obviously it means that interest rates go up. If interest rates go up, then government borrowing goes up, and then you move full circle, that goes up, and the Chancellor will be even more resistance to calls for extra spending, even more resistance to those widespread calls not to go ahead with ending that £20 temporary uplift in universal credit.
Nick, thank you for that. Well, we invited the government onto the programme, but they declined. I'm joined instead by Conservative MP Andrew Bridgen and Rod Mackenzie of the Road Haulage Association. Rod, if I could start with you, why has this happened?
Well, it's happened because of a multitude of factors. We've had Brexit, we've lost about 20,000 European drivers. We lost 40,000 trucker training tests during the pandemic because of social distancing rules. Those tests were cancelled. And we had a historic shortage in this country of tens of thousands of lorry drivers. And that means we've got a shortage now of 100,000. And when you think that everything we get in Britain comes on the back of a lorry, whether it's fuel or food or clothes or whatever it is, at some point, if there are no drivers to drive those trucks, the trucks aren't moving, we're not getting our stuff.
How is the situation then this evening? Because of course, you know, this is something that people can really understand now. It's hopefully going to be temporary, but when they can't get fuel, they can't get fuel.
Well, I don't think we're talking about, absolutely no fuel or food or anything like that. People shouldn't panic buy food or fuel or anything else. That's not what this is about. This is about stockouts. It's about shortages. It's about a normal supply chain being disrupted. And Newsnight was the first TV programme to highlight this back in the summer when they talked about the lorry driver shortage. The government could have listened then and acted then, and they haven't. And that's why we've had a sort of government by inertia here, where it's got gradually worse.
Well, let me bring in Andrew Bridgen at that point. Government by inertia, 100,000 shortage here for drivers that we need. And there's reports in the Times, we understand, that the government is looking at bringing in the army if it's necessary. But with this, why hasn't the government sorted this out in good time?
Well, I actually raised this with the government 6 years ago when we were 50,000 lorry drivers short, urging them to bring in measures that would allow HGV training into the apprentice programme. The government actually did that 3 months ago. It was when we were 100,000 lorry drivers short. We've got an endemic problem of retention and recruitment into the haulage industry in the UK. The average lorry driver is normally a man and he's well in his 50s. We're not attracting young people into an industry. And the shocking figures are that we're actually not short of HGV drivers per se. We've got 600,000 people who are qualified to drive those big trucks, but only 300,000 people choose to work in the industry. That is about paying conditions, and that paying conditions have been suppressed for a very long time by bringing in EU migrants who are willing to work for those wages and conditions, but they were never willing to work for long. And that's why nearly opening the doors to 20, 30, 40,000 drivers will only ever be a short-term fix. The industry needs to modernise, it needs to improve paying conditions. We need to retain and attract young people into the industry.
And that's, of course, painting a picture of how this is complex. Nobody's trying to say it's straightforward, and it's good to hear that detail. But when I asked you why the government hasn't taken this action, you just heard from Rod about this in the summer. Why do you not think this hasn't been acted upon?
Because the drivers are there. We do have 600,000 people qualified to drive HGV trucks, but only half of them choose to actually work in that profession.
My question isn't about that. My question is about the government and actually doing something about this. Those facts were available. The situation has only got worse, and now we're in this situation. Why do you think nothing's been done?
Well, the employers can increase pay and working conditions, and they will attract more of the 300,000 people who could be driving trucks but choose not to return to the industry and play their part. that's totally within the employer's gift to do so.
Okay,
What's that got to do with government?
Okay, so that's what you see for the employers to do. We've also heard that Brexit has played a role. How much of a role do you see that Brexit has played? Andrew, I'm so sorry, we've just lost your picture. I'm hoping you're going to come back to us.
Sorry, I'm back.
Hello, carry on.
Well, clearly, but that's what's been going on for a long time. That isn't addressing the issue of pay and conditions. So all you've got is people willing to work as a lorry driver for a few years.
It got rid of 20,000 people.
But that's just a short-term fix, isn't it? It's sorting out the systemic problem of the industry, in that the workforce is aged. I've got friends.
You've said that. You've made that point several times. I'm just saying, how much of a role do you think Brexit has played?
Well, clearly the game's changed, and any employer would have known that when we voted to end free movement, that whether you're in haulage or in care homes, that changes the equation of how you've got to value your staff. And this is very much part of the levelling up agenda. We've got to move.
I know it's about moving forward and being where we are now, but it's also about planning, about who you allow to still continue to work and be on those lists. Rod, let me bring you back in on that, because what do you want now? Of course, let's come to the point that Andrew was making about employers and wages, but with regards to what you want from government, what's that?
Well, we've asked for a short-term measure, it is very short-term, to allow drivers onto the shortage occupation list and to look at seasonal visas for overseas drivers, not European necessarily, but foreign drivers. That is very short-term. We do need to, I agree with Andrew, attract a new generation of Brits into the industry, but we need to make it easier for them, and we need to make the industry more attractive. And pay and conditions have moved and are moving, and that's a good thing. But there's a range of other issues, like motorway service stations.
I was going to say, don't you need to hurry that bit up, to Andrew's point, and actually make it more appealing?
Well, absolutely, but there are things we can control and things we can't control. We can control pay and conditions, but we can't control motorway service areas. Women are put off coming into the business of being a lorry driver because the loo facilities are appalling. Washing facilities are appalling. Safe truck parking is almost non-existent. It's rife with crime if you park up at night. Your truck can be broken into, you can be threatened. It's a really tough job being a lorry driver. They are heroes, but we don't treat them like heroes. And as a nation, we need to start doing that. And that's the way of attracting a new generation of Brits back into this great industry on which we all rely.
Andrew, can I just bring your attention to something else, but it will fit in a bit to this picture that as we look ahead into the winter and the spending review. A lot of talk about the universal credit cut next month. Andrew Bridgen, should the government go ahead with it against this winter backdrop that we're talking about?
Well, we're heading to a time of inflation. All governments around the world have printed a lot of money, created a lot of money during the COVID pandemic. That is chasing finite assets, so prices are rising. I've said on the record that I thought it was morally and politically wrong to take away that £20 at a time of high inflation, which we're probably going to have for a couple of years. I think the government will take steps, probably doing something considerable on the taper to mitigate the loss of the £20 and offer clear encouragement for people on UC to be able to earn a little bit more money and keep more of it themselves when they do so. The government's got to do something. And we can't balance the books of the country off the backs of the poorest in our society. That's morally wrong.
Andrew Bridgen, thank you very much. And to Rod Mackenzie there.